Hello, writers. Have you ever bought a writing craft book someone says you just have to read?
Is it still sitting on your shelf? Have you even cracked the spine?
That's totally me.
Don't ask Renee how many craft books she owns.
Why do we keep buying these books we never read?
We all want to improve as writers, but that's hard to do alone.
That's why we started the Words to Write By podcast, to tackle these books together, chapter by chapter, and learn from their advice.
Or not. Sometimes they're wrong.
Hi, I'm Renee Nelson, former college writing instructor turned full-time writer and podcaster. After many years, I finally have a complete draft of my memoir.
And I'm Kim Smugado, author of the humorous fantasy novel Our Comeback Tour is Slaying Monsters, which is the first book in the Boy Bands and Dragons series, released by Riverfolk Publishing.
And now, on with the podcast. All right, everybody.
Hello, it's been a minute.
It has been a minute, but we are back.
Yes, I will say that we had a bit of scheduling problems, but also that we've been busy writing, so that's our excuse.
Yes, but a break's not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. Today we're doing a workshop, something kind of interesting, something that we heard discussed as a possible tool for AI, and we decided to give it a try. It's called NotebookLM.
And if it's not on your radar, it's actually really fascinating. Google offers this for free. You upload, say, a chapter of a book you're reading.
Or a court case.
Or as my friend's example, he actually did this. He got a 100-page document from his bank, like his investment managers, on the whole state of the economy and why they're putting the money where they're putting it. And it was 100 pages. So he just uploaded that thing into this.
And it doesn't read it. It turns into a podcast. It turns it into a discussion between two people discussing what the content is, which is kind of nice. My favorite podcasts aren't just a single person talking to the podcast. My favorite podcasts are back and forth. I just pick up more stuff when I hear back and forth.
Right. It makes you feel like you're part of a discussion, which we thought was really fascinating because that's what we do.
Right. We read documents or chapters of a book. We discuss the documents back and forth. And so the question is our podcast no longer necessary because of AI?
Uh-oh.
I don't think it is.
We'll find out.
Right. So I took a chapter of the first book we ever did, John Gardner's The Art of Fiction.
Ah, John. Good old John Gardner. Oh, my God.
And I scanned in the last chapter. One of our theories reading this book is that nobody actually gets the last chapter of this book because it's got some stuff in it.
Oh, my. There's some sexist stuff and some racist stuff and some extremely pedantic, confusing stuff.
And so the question is, what will NotebookLM do with this?
And just as to throw it out there, I have not listened to this yet.
No, neither of us have.
This is our raw reactions to what Google spat out at us.
I listened just a little bit at the front to make sure it makes sense, but yeah, we'll see where it goes. We'll also have bits of our podcast that we did on this many years back for comparison.
Yeah. Do we have any predictions?
Well, I think it's going to be accurate, but I don't think it's going to be as entertaining as us.
No, we're funny.
And also, I think it's only going to draw from the text that's available. So we bring a lot of expertise and a lot of our own experiences.
Right. We provide a layer of analysis, various layers of analysis. We've got our personal experience, we've got our education, we've got our reading history, we've got just our own interests and preferences. And we bring all of that to every discussion that we have.
And also, part of the reason why you listen to a podcast is because you kind of like the people that do it and you get involved in them in a certain way. And you're just not going to get that involved in an AI podcast.
Right. We're hella likable.
Mm-hmm. Now, it might bring out some information that we missed.
Or decided not to talk about, because we don't talk about every single thing.
Right. This chapter, just so you know,
it was insanely long.
It was 30 pages.
30 pages. And let me just pull out a rando few sentences. Though causal sequence gives the best, most obvious kind of profluence, it is not the only possible means to that necessary end. A story or novel may develop argumentatively, leading the reader point by point to some conclusion. In this case, events occur not to justify later events, but to dramatize logical positions. Thus, event A does not cause event B, but stands in some logical relation to it. Holy crap.
You wonder why people don't get to the end of this book.
And you know why you want to listen to a podcast to do all that work for you.
Now, I also think that the AI podcast will get all the pronunciation right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let's hear what the AI has to say.
You know that feeling? You want to really get how a great story works, like the mechanics behind the magic a writer creates, but all the theory just feels dense, like reading a textbook.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be overwhelming.
Well, think of this as your direct route in. Today, we're doing a deep dive into plotting in fiction. We're using some really sharp insights from Gardner as our guide. And our mission is pretty straightforward. We want to give you a clear handle on the main ways writers build compelling narratives and, what makes some plots just hit harder than others.
Right, but what gives them that power?
Exactly.
Okay, first impressions and thoughts?
Like, wow. They sound real. They sound so real.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
They don't start a sentence and then back up, so that's kind of edited, but AI knows when people pause.
Totally. If you had played that and I didn't know it was AI, I don't think I would have guessed.
At least not at the beginning.
Right. I do think it's funny, and I picked up on, them almost like as if they were reading an outline. So our main points are going to be, and there are 3 main points in this thing. I'm like, there might be more than 3. Come on. Like, that sounds like an essay they're reading.
Because there's always 3 main points.
Of course.
Well, we did our podcast with 3 main points too often.
Did we?
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why people pick 3 main points. Because after that, you lose interest.
I guess. Anyway, they made it clear what they're up to. They're going to give it to us. They wrapped it up in human sounding mannerisms and speech.
So I'd like to take a moment to show how we started this episode.
Oh, yeah. Clever.
Okay. So we finished the book.
Oh my God.
Did you ever think that you'd finish this book?
Not soon after starting it.
As I was going through it, maybe not quite after the first chapter, but definitely after the second chapter, I realized that the only way this was going to be read was if we had accountability buddies.
Even if we just had friends without this podcast, I think we would have abandoned this book.
I think we should just dive into the chapter, into plotting. So we have a more biased approach going into this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We have, I feel, more personality.
Maybe if we made AI read the whole book up to this point, they might have a bit more attitude too. I don't know.
That's true. Yeah, I'm not sure how much attitude the designers of this AI would give the AI.
Right, because you'd assume that somebody actually putting this in would want to know what was in the book as opposed to why that chapter sucked.
Can you add, can you make the podcast host snarky?
I did not see that lever there.
Okay.
Okay. Let's find out what the 3 points are now.
No, yes, find out what the 3 points are.
So we'll look at the 3 main ways Gardner outlines. Borrowing old story patterns, working backward from the big climax.
Which is a fascinating one.
It really is, yeah. Or building things forward, step by step, from whatever situation you start with. So yeah, let's get into it.
Okay, so what's interesting right off the bat is, the most obvious way seems to be that logical cause and effect chain. Event A leads to event B, which leads to event C, that kind of forward push, profluence.
Yeah, that feels intuitive.
It does, but it's definitely not the only way. Gardner brings up this idea of the argumentative plot.
Argumentative plot, okay.
Yeah, think of it less like dominoes falling and more like a story dramatizing different points in a logical argument. So event A doesn't necessarily cause event B in a physical sense. It represents the next logical position or idea the story is exploring.
Okay. Like Gardner's example, right? The character trying different tactics for a problem.
Exactly. Maybe they try being charitable first. That doesn't work. So then they pivot to being purely selfish. Still no good. Then maybe they try being cunning.
So it's a sequence, but the connection is intellectual, logical steps rather than direct consequences.
Precisely. The link is the unfolding argument. But here's the catch Gardner points out. Sometimes that pure intellectual engagement isn't quite enough,
Right. It might lack the emotional punch.
Exactly. And Gardner argues it can sometimes miss that gut-level impact of what he calls energetic action. The engine here is the intellect, the logic.
Like a lecture playing out in scenes.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Rather than a story that feels like it's tapping into something raw about reality through action and consequence, it can be really clever, but maybe not deeply moving in the same way.
Okay, that makes sense. So building on these different plot engines, let's talk about the picaresque. That's more about a journey, right?
So, thoughts?
Well, It sounds like the female podcaster is just a cheerleader so far. I'm hoping she adds more to the conversation other than, oh, that makes sense. Because I'm sitting there like, how so? Please explain yourself.
She definitely doesn't bring as much color to the podcast.
No.
Well, neither of them do. But you're right. We should keep track of, like, how much more the guy talks than the girl.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
But yeah, she just sounded like a cheerleader. And she was just like, yeah, that makes sense. Or, uh-huh. And I'm like, well, do you have anything else to say in response to what this guy is saying? And I feel like it's just a summary. They're just summarizing with ums and ahs and things like that.
I mean, that is partly what it does, right? It presents it in a way that's more digestible by going back and forth, but it really is meant to just summarize what's in the text. It's not meant to challenge it.
It's not really a discussion either. It's more of a definition summary.
Yeah, and I was zoning out a little bit at some point, partly because we listened to the podcast we did, and we definitely talked about the stringing together of events and the intellectual approach versus, or an intellectual story versus one that cuts to the heart of it.
Right.
And now they're going on to something called picaresque. Here's our take on this. I had never known what a picturesque plot was.
I think it's picaresque.
I didn't know how to pronounce it either, apparently. A picaresque plot.
I did not know what one of those were either, but we do know what they are. We just had never heard the term.
Okay, I'm going to jump and see what they have to say about picaresque plots.
Let's talk about the picaresque. That's more about a journey, right?
Traditionally, yes. You follow a character, often, a little bit of a likable rogue.
The picaro.
The picaro, exactly. Moving through different levels of society, exposing the hypocrisies or quirks at each level. It's like a social tour guide.
A grand tour of societal flaws.
You got it.
Okay. A grand tour of societal flaws. That is a direct quote from the book.
Mm-hmm.
But she's saying it as if it's her own opinion.
Right, like she came up with it.
Yeah, like I am crunching these quotes and this stuff and then like filtering it through in a way that people can understand. I'm just going to pull out the ideas that make sense that he's already written and then like dishing them out as if it's an opinion.
Well, it makes sense if you want to know the content of the book. You don't want the AI to come up with something new. If you just want to know what's in the chapter, like if you're listening to a legal argument, you wouldn't want the AI bringing in some new idea.
I guess, but this stuff is very dense and it would be helpful if they explained a bit more. Now, I will throw them a bone here. We did not talk about the moral stuff of the picaresque plot, drawing attention to the foibles of modern society.
We definitely used foibles, but by this point, I think we decided that Gardner's morality was not worth talking about.
No, but what we did is we did give an example.
Yes.
These guys, well, so far have not given us any examples from like real world texts.
Right. We said, what were the examples?
Tom Sawyer, I think. I mean, if you've read Tom Sawyer, you know its purpose.
Yeah. Do you know Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn?
It was either Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn, same author. Mark Twain. Right. That's his shtick. He is critiquing society through these characters.
Right. And the journeys that they make and then go through different levels of society and all that stuff.
Right. We talk about that, but without saying, giving us an example of it, like a novel or book that's been written, the listener is forced to only rely on their own material that they know about or the books that they have read. And that's not a safe assumption.
Right. Or they're relying on the books that the author has read and their opinion. And a lot of books have a lot more examples than Gardner. That was one of our issues with the book. When we were talking about this, we also gave the example of like 1980s sitcoms where everything reset at the beginning. Or you said
Saturday morning cartoons where at the end, like even though they went through all this traumatic stuff and they almost died, they're laughing at the end. Ah, ha, 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 and we all lived happily ever after. Until next week, kids. Yeah.
Okay, back to the podcast.
But here's where it gets really interesting how writers adapt this. Gardner offers this amazing example. Imagine taking Grendel, the monster from Beowulf.
Okay, definitely not your typical picaro.
Right. And instead of moving through social strata, Grendel moves through a list of great ideas from Western philosophy.
Whoa. So each stop on the journey is a philosophical concept.
Exactly. He's encountering Plato, then maybe, Descartes. It's a wild idea.
So how does that work as a plot? Does it hold up?
Well, Gardner's point is crucial here.
Yeah.
He says it really depends. Does this sequence raise real questions about the characters, in this case Grendel's well-being, is there a genuine threat?
Ah, so it can't just be passive observation.
No, if Grendel is just sort of like ticking off philosophical boxes, we probably won't care much. But if each idea challenges him, puts him in danger, makes him question his own monstrous existence, then we're invested.
Makes sense.
I do not remember Grendel being in this chapter.
Wasn't it?
I did. I actually checked just now, and there was a page that discussed Beowulf and this concept. But,
Right. But he actually wrote Grendel.
Right. He did write that Grendel. So that made sense. But that was sort of at the beginning. I'm kind of curious how far they go along in the discussion of this, because we used a very different example from this chapter.
Oh, yes. I think this is very interesting, too. Has anyone here read Grendel?
Well, people read Beowulf.
People read Beowulf. Okay, you're right. Have people read Beowulf? Have our listeners read Beowulf? Maybe.
But if you don't know what Beowulf is, you don't really know what the deal of having him go through time and seeing these different philosophers.
Right. Or Descartes. Does anyone know Descartes? I mean, I know who these people are. I was a lit major. But I would not expect the general populace to have read it, nor do they need to.
Well, what I got out of this from this podcast is Grendel, which I know is a monster or very early mythological story. And then I hear a bunch of philosophers, and I know that they came at different time points. So, like, I get it, but still, I think Huckleberry Finn's a much better example.
Yeah. Or the first Witcher book.
I bet they will not make Witcher references in this
They
podcast.
They should. Because that first book is totally a picaresque novel. And it's actually very much like Grendel. He's kind of a monster, and he has to go, okay, never mind, I'll stop.
We need stakes for the character, even if he's a monster debating philosophy.
Absolutely. But even then, Gardner suggests it might still lack what he calls that final energy, that feeling of an unstoppable process unfolding, that inevitability.
The momentum.
Yeah. And then he briefly touches on plots built by symbolic juxtaposition. Think Beowulf itself or lots of quest stories.
Where the meaning comes from things placed side by side.
Exactly. Not cause and effect, but the resonance between, say, a character, an object, and a setting. Like how contrasting images work in poetry to build a bigger theme.
Okay, so this leads us to a really key distinction Gardner makes, doesn't it? The difference between these intellectual structures and what he calls energetic ones.
Yes, this is huge.
Okay, I'm going to stop it on this is something huge. So you have to wait a moment because we want to talk about something else, which is a pronunciation they used.
Yes, they keep calling it the energetic novel.
Mm-hmm.
And in our podcast, we made a distinction. It is not energetic. It is energeic.
Yes.
Or jaic. I'm not sure. But it comes from Aristotle, and the root word is energesis.
And you have a theory of why they can't pronounce it correctly.
Right. I was like, well, maybe I'm pronouncing it wrong. So I'm doubting myself. I start going on Google. Google will not give you a definition because it will automatically fix it to energetic, no matter what I do. I cannot get Google to give me a definition. And then finally I said, all right, I'll go to the root of the word energesis. And it told me that it was not a modern English word.
So don't use NotebookLM to read ancient texts.
Yes. And to me, this is bad because it's a very specific term that comes from Aristotle. And he's focusing a lot on Aristotle in this chapter. And to get that wrong is pretty bad.
Yeah, well, it sets you up to be sounding intelligent about this at some point. Someone saying energetic. No, I think you meant energetic.
Yeah, it would be really funny to be like in a lecture and like talking to your professor. Oh, energetic. It's like, no, it's energeic. And then you arguing and realizing as a teacher that the student did not actually read the text. They listened to a podcast version of it through Google.
It's a whole new world. I would like, I'm gonna pause and bring us up from our podcast how we discussed energeic because I thought it was pretty good.
The term energeic, had you come across that term before?
Probably in a chemistry class. I don't know.
You probably did. I actually looked up the term. It comes from Aristotle, energesis. It's not normally used for plots. It's used for having to do with thought and our actions. And it's used in science. What's driving our actions and where does it come from? He was really reading a lot of Aristotle when he wrote this chapter.
There's a lot of Aristotle in this one.
In fact, there is not very much original content, ideas, or anything in this chapter. If you read Aristotle's Poetics, he pretty much just covers everything Aristotle already talks about.
So basically he's doing what we're doing?
He is pretty much doing what we're doing, only he does it in a really funky way. Not as entertaining, I don't think.
That little quote also brings up our judgment of the chapter and the fact that there really isn't much new in it.
No. I thought it was important to talk about how it was focused on Aristotle. And he used a lot from Aristotle instead of just saying, oh, like in Aristotle, as the podcast host would say. I think that's important because you know it's not coming just from Gardner. You're not just giving Gardner the credit for these ideas.
The podcasters we're listening to are total Gardner fanboys.
Oh, they sound like it so far.
So let's find out what this huge thing they were talking about next.
This is huge. He argues that while those intellectual structures, the argumentative plot, maybe the modified picaresque, the symbolic juxtaposition might be, well, easier for the writer to design because the logic is clear.
You always know where you're going, logically.
Right. But they might not connect with the reader on as many levels as the energetic structures. Those engage not just the intellect, but also our emotions, our gut feeling for how reality seems to work.
So the energetic feels more organic, discovered rather than imposed.
That's a great way to put it.
Uh-huh.
Gardner suggests that while the mind might admire a clever design, the heart connects more deeply when a story feels like it's unfolding according to its own internal, inevitable logic.
And with the intellectual structure, the writer's kind of always in control, pulling the strings very visibly.
Often, yes. They're guiding you along a preset path. The reader might be trying to figure out the system, the allegory. And Gardner points out, sometimes when you do figure it out, like maybe in Kafka's A Country Doctor, where everything maps neatly onto an idea, that initial sense of mystery can actually fade. It can feel a bit constructed.
A little too neat, maybe.
Less like life.
Potentially, yeah. It's like being told a truth versus experiencing something that feels true deep down.
You know, one of the reasons to use this AI is to help you get through stuff that you don't want to read yourself or you would put you to sleep. But I'm finding I'm being put to sleep by this.
I'm just reading not even a summarized version. I mean, they're pulling direct quotes and not calling them quotes.
I mean, that's AI in a nutshell. The AI doesn't recognize quotes. It's just patterns it picks up and spits back.
It's interesting because it's adopting the language. Like when ChatGPT was talking to me, like I was a kid or something and I got annoyed. It's taking up the language of this chapter, which is a problem.
Right. So I don't think it's actually making it more interesting, or if you had a hard time reading it yourself, that this would help you get through it. Now, if you're very familiar with the text or there's a particular kind of text that you're common to read, like maybe a legal document, maybe it's a good way for someone that's always kind of aware of how this goes to get information out of it. But it's not going to be easy cliff notes if you can't get through the chapter itself.
Right. Or you don't already have some kind of understanding of this vocabulary and what they're already kind of talking about. If you already had a background in what they're talking about, you'll leave with it maybe with an understanding of what happened in the chapter. Will you learn anything new? No.
Right. This is all pretty surface. I mean, that's actually a problem with a lot of craft books is they are a bit surface until you think about them carefully. Like they make a statement and it's like, okay, that makes sense. And then you kind of forget about it.
Right.
But then, you know, having a conversation with somebody, it's like, wait a second. No, it doesn't make sense. Oh, okay, it does make sense. Oh, I get it.
Well, this is how you read like an active reader is when you do read, it is assumed that you will be like responding to the texts. It's like what teach our students in composition classes.
Yeah, and this isn't activating my listening skills when I'm listening to this podcast.
No, they're not pushing back in any kind of way.
Okay, in the interest of not falling asleep, I'm going to jump ahead because they go through a long philosophical debate about how you have to connect with the reader, yada, yada, yada. And we'll switch to this bit here.
Okay, let's switch gears to something very practical then. Plotting backward from the climax. You start with the big bang at the end.
Helen's surprise, yeah.
Right, and then you figure out what needed to happen before that to make it work, to make it meaningful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's take our own example. A roadside fruit vendor's pickup gets smashed by a huge semi-truck.
Okay, I'd like to point out, well, first of all, there's a lawnmower, which is something you do not get in AI podcasting. So another point for that. If we're taking a tally,
right?
No lawnmower. But right now, they just implied that the AI had come up with this example of the accident when that was straight from Gardner's text. So it's making itself sound smart, like it came up with an example, but it didn't.
Right.
A roadside fruit vendor's pickup gets smashed by a huge semi-truck. Boom. That's your climax.
Okay, dramatic.
Now the questions start. Was it just a terrible accident? Or did the truck driver hit him on purpose? Or something else entirely?
And the answer changes everything about the story leading up to it.
Completely.
Yeah.
If the driver did it intentionally, You have to build both characters, show the motive, and Gardner notes the random motiveless villain is kind of played out, right?
Yeah, a bit tired.
Stronger stories often have understandable conflicts, even if the actions are extreme. But if it's an accident or the cause is unknown, then the semi becomes more like this impersonal force.
And the meaning has to come from the vendor, his situation, his character.
Right. The truck might even become symbolic, in that case representing, I don't know, fate or industrial power or something bigger.
Okay, I'm going to give the AI props. I thought that was a pretty good explanation. I thought it gave an example and it addressed one thing and addressed another thing. I followed it pretty well. So I would say if you've got a book with a lot of examples, the AI can take you through the examples.
Yeah, it's a good point. They will only use the examples that are within the text, at least so far in our experience, but they will break them down for you.
Right.
I did like their explanation about like however it ends up, depending on the truck accident was intentional or whatever, you have to like build up according to that. Mm-hmm. That was helpful, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, it was actually practically helpful.
Yes.
So there's that.
Okay, now let's flip that. What if we focus on the aggressor, the person causing the climax?
Right. Say a woman deliberately runs down a flagman on a road construction site.
Okay, this is the reason I chose this chapter to put through the AI, this coming example, because this is probably one of my favorite moments in our podcast up to this point when we discovered this chapter in this book and went, OMG, he really wrote that?
Yeah, it gets pretty insane.
So let's see how they describe the story that Gardner constructs with a character first.
As the example for writing a novel. Just
wait for it.
Just wait for it.
Again, the immediate question is why?
Exactly. What kind of person does that? What's her motive? Is it personal against that flagman? Or does he just symbolize something she's lashing out against?
Gardner plays with this, right? He suggests maybe she doesn't even know the guy and shifts the focus to a character named Fanny, a stripper.
Oh, they're going there.
So just before we go into this, what do you think they're going to do with it?
I don't know. Are they going to mention that she's a stripper?
Well, they just mentioned she's a stripper.
I just heard him say Fanny, and I was
I
got
said
really
Fanny,
excited.
Fanny the stripper.
Fanny the stripper. Oh my God.
He said it quietly.
I don't know.
On the one hand, I think that they're going to cut out a lot of the really awful stuff because AIs are trained to cut out the awful stuff. On the other hand, they've been relying so much on Gardner's ideas to prove these points. I'm not sure you can prove his point without referencing what he says.
I don't know. Okay, I can't wait to hear what they do. But really, all they're using is anything they've been given. They're not really using any outside anything. There's no pushback. There's no opinion here. You're getting a summary with human voices.
Right. And it's not AI's fault that this coming text
No.
is that. We're not blaming Google or any of the AIs for what comes out of their mouths next. It's
I don't
all
know.
on Gardner.
That remains to be seen.
Fanny, a stripper.
Yeah. And Fanny's situation immediately gives us potential motives. She's older, more traditional performer, and she's losing ground to younger, more explicit dancers.
You can feel the pressure building.
Right. So you can imagine scenes. Fanny watching the younger dancers rehearse, feeling that mix of jealousy and despair, a fight with the manager where she gets fired.
Well, that was impressive.
Boo, disappointing.
Do you guys want to hear what really got said?
Dun dun.
But there was something kind of special in this chapter that I was not expecting. It starts with you need to pick your central character. This is a woman. So Gardner says the choices are a harried, unhappy housewife, a tough female executive, or a stripper. Can you guess which one Gardner picks?
Oh, he picks the stripper. That's the choices. Housewife, tough executive, or stripper.
The sexism is alive
Man.
in this one.
So let me read to you the paragraph in which he develops this character.
Man, who wants to read it? Do you want to read it?
I want to read it. Let us say that our stripper, Fanny, is 36.
Go on, do it again. Start over. Fanny.
Let us say that our stripper, Fanny, is 36, well-preserved, even beautiful, but hard put to compete with younger strippers of the new breed. She's an old-style stripper, the kind who teases and scorns her male audience as if taunting them, asking to be tamed. A classic act. She's been the star for years. But her act, like her body, is slipping.
Oh, man.
Her act is of the highly polished kind. She unclothes slowly, tormentingly, with artistic style. She has, let us say, trained white doves who fly away with each article of clothing she takes off.
Wow.
The doves are what did to me.
Younger strippers who are beginning to challenge her top billing are new style strippers.
New style
Nakedness
strippers.
means nothing to them. They take off their clothes as indifferently as trees drop leaves. And their acts, because of their easy and uninhibited sexuality, have no need of high artifice or polish. Whereas Fanny grew up in Texan, of stern Southern Baptist stock,
She's like a cow.
and fled to burlesque in troubled defiance, guiltily but brazenly. The new breed grew up in cities like San Francisco and feels no such inner conflict.
Texas versus San Francisco. Those harlots in San Francisco. Like, really? It's so bizarre. I was taken aback. I was reading this like stripper. Are you serious? Stripper? And then it just got worse and worse and worse.
And all that was lost with Google, with NotebookLM.
Yeah, NotebookLM really let us down. It didn't really let us experience Fanny the Stripper in quite the same way.
No, it's the whole business about her getting older and having problems with the other strippers and getting fired. That all got
in San Francisco and Southern stock.
and the doves.
Oh my God. That would be, I kind of want to watch this stripper show. It sounds kind of cool. I just want to mention that one thing that AI does is it discusses the examples in the text as if you've read them. They don't go into any detail. They just use the example. And it's like, well, if you've read Chaucer, cool, you would kind of understand what they're talking about. If you had read this paragraph about Fanny the Stripper, you would know what they're talking about. Otherwise, you're kind of like this person just kind of like listening in on a conversation. You're only sort of following.
Right. They don't stop and say why they use this example because Gardner assumed they used the example. So there's not that. But in this case, because they go surface level, because it is completely inappropriate for them to talk about any of this stuff, for all how horrible it is, he did put a lot of work into who this woman was and what she was experiencing and her background and the philosophical differences between her and the new strippers. Like, for better or for worse, Gardner put a lot of thought into this.
Right. He put a lot of thought into being as sexist and racist as possible.
Right. But for the purposes of learning, it shows that if you're going to develop this, if you're going to use this technique, you're going to have to really come up with a person. It's not going to be simply that paragraph that our AIs gave, because that's not actually going to be enough to drive the whole story. You need that whole hot mess that we just heard to drive the story of why she would hit a flag guard.
So this is what concerns me about AI here is from the composition, post-secondary reading instructor, person that is me, okay? There are levels of literacy. There are critical reading skills. You're not just reading for meaning. You're also like, well, what's the motive of this author? What's the history of this author? How does that explain things about, how does that add color to what they're saying? And all of these things, like it's the rhetorical triangle, okay? And if you can't do that, AI cannot do that. Unless maybe you could ask it to, and it somehow skims through the Wikipedia and reads hundreds of pages of articles talking about how much of a douchebag John Gardner was. I don't know.
If we had to update a Wikipedia page.
Maybe we should. Maybe we should update it. We'll put in that paragraph about Fanny the Stripper, see what happens.
So I'm going to go back to the AI text. I actually figured out a new way so we can comment while we listen, so we might be a bit more interactive on this part here. Hang on.
And then the encounter with the flagman becomes this sudden explosion.
Potentially. Maybe he represents something to her in that moment. Authority, male judgment, just an obstacle when she's already at breaking point. The act becomes an impulsive lashing out.
Okay, that seems plausible as a sequence of events, but Gardner pushes further, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
He says that might still not be enough.
This is such a crucial point. What we've sketched out might be a convincing imitation of reality. It shows how it could happen. But does it have deeper meaning? Does it resonate?
It lacks theme.
It might.
Okay, so I think that's the end of Fanny the Stripper.
I guess so. That's all they're going to dedicate to Fanny the Stripper.
Well, I mean, they're going to explore the theme, so let's see if they can actually come up with a theme.
Only Gardner.
The next step, the art step, is to mine deeper, to explore the fundamental issues or questions raised by Fanny's situation, her anxieties.
So what could the theme be in Fanny's story?
Maybe it's about male chauvinism.
You think?
Or the classic art versus life or art versus nature debate, comparing her performance style to the younger women's. Or maybe it's about nakedness.
Oh, I think Renee did a better job on this one. Let's hear it.
The theme of our story about Fanny the stripper might be, of course, male chauvinism. No.
Maybe.
No, really? Or it might be art versus life, or nature, or nakedness in all its forms.
So the other part about this is the AI presents it as if it's coming up with it. We mentioned that. But obviously from this, we were reading the quote and the text, and it was exactly the same. Theirs was more boring.
Right. We were reading a text. And of course, the sarcasm really adds to how awful the example was, which AI just glossed right over.
Male chauvinism. Or...
Yeah.
All right, let's get back to these guys.
Male chauvinism, indeed.
And the theme you choose then shapes everything. The details, the images, the style.
Absolutely. If it's art versus nature, you focus on the contrasts in their acts. If it's nakedness, maybe you highlight details like peeling paint in the dressing room or the vulnerability she feels.
Not peeling from her clothes, just...
Or even something contrasting, like a prim janitor.
The details serve the theme.
They become charged with meaning by the theme.
Peeling paint?
Peeling paint.
So again, they cut out a lot. I don't know. Should we throw in that, or should we make people go back to the episode to hear out what he had to say about that?
Will people go back and listen?
I kind of feel like I want to put it in.
Put it in.
Okay, so here's where Gardner actually goes.
If the theme the writer chooses is nakedness, he will choose other details to brood on and develop. The chipping paint on the dressing room walls, for instance, the psychological nakedness of some character, the manager's unwillingness to disguise or cover over his lack of interest in Fanny's well-being, or, if it comes to that, his hatred of all she represents.
Some of the lines are just so beautiful. Like, while he writes into the process of repeated revisions, what is it that he really thinks? How naked should we be, or can we be? Is openness and vulnerability a virtue or a defect? To what extent? With what important qualifications? He finds himself bringing in black strippers, perhaps an Indian stripper, supported by imagery that recalls primitive nakedness.
Oh, man, he really went there.
No, he did not have to put this section in. There were a number of people that could have told him this does not belong here.
That has to go in.
Part of the reason we chose this book was because I've been at a writing conference and it had been mentioned. And this is kind of one of those ones that people hold up as like, an early how to write guide. I wanted to see what it had. Another reason we chose it was because the author had been dead. The author actually died, I think, shortly before this book was published. So we didn't have to worry about anyone coming after us for it, depending on what we saw. I get irritated that this book is continuing to be recommended when it has this kind of stuff in it. Like, they've gone through multiple editions and no one's cut this out.
Yeah, it's really bad. I mean, so when I was doing research on this book, because, we did a lot of research before, like, doing the podcast, we're like, okay, where's this book? Where's it coming from? I watched these YouTube videos. There's very little pushback. And no one mentions Fanny the Stripper, which means nobody gets to Fanny the Stripper. Nobody even finishes this book. And I have seen this book suggested in an MFA program before. And people have said, have you read The Art of Fiction? They'll drop the name. I do not believe those people actually read the book. There's no way.
I would prefer to think that they didn't read the book, because if they were able to ignore this section, what else were they ignoring?
No one in their right mind would ever suggest this book.
Yeah. So that's our lesson from this book. Okay, let's hear what more the podcasters have to say.
And Gardner stresses the theme isn't just slapped on top. It emerges from the story. It starts intuitively, playing with the character and situation.
Musing on it.
Yeah, musing. But then it becomes a more conscious intellectual act of shaping the material to explore that core meaning. That's where fiction becomes, as he says, serious thought, true art.
True art.
After all that.
Okay, so that's plotting backward. What about the third way? Plotting forward from an initial situation.
Right. Gardner gives this great quirky example. A young Chinese English teacher in San Francisco gets kidnapped by some Chinese thugs.
Okay, unusual start.
And their demand is even weirder. They want him to write their life story, make them famous.
Huh.
Okay, I actually remember I kind of liked this example because it was so off the wall.
Yeah. It even noticed it was off the wall.
Yeah. yeah, it was one of those bonker things that it was in there. But we didn't actually cover it in the podcast because we were still kind of blown away by Fanny the Stripper. Okay, so we were continuing to listen to the podcast. The podcast it gave us was about 20 minutes, and it mostly, like we commented, it's kind of boring. But there was one other example I wanted to bring up when they are directly quoting, or not, they're semi-quoting from Gardner about the difference between a novella and a novel. So here it is.
So the novella is like a tone poem, focused, emotional arc.
That's Gardner's analogy, yeah. Elegant, tracing an emotional line, small epiphanies, leading to a big change for the main character. He contrasts it with the novel as being more like a Beethoven symphony.
Grand, complex, multi-layered.
Exactly.
And then here is how we covered this in the previous podcast.
I liked his comment about the novella being an elegant tracing of an emotional line. Whereas he says that a novel is like a symphony that in its closing movement echoes and resounds with all that has gone on before.
Yeah, that does actually sound nice. He wrote a good sentence.
They don't quote it. They summarize it. And they summarize the bad stuff about Fanny the Slipper, but they also summarize some other genuine good writing he did in there.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not getting this style. Again, another level of analysis they can't do yet. Anyway.
One of the reasons why we did keep plodding through Gardner, besides the fact that we committed to it, was that he did have good writing.
No, he didn't.
He had some elegant bits.
He had a couple of good sentences. I mean, like really, it was very pedantic. It was very hard to read through. He was essentially he was a gatekeeper. Through language, through the way that he was writing, which was completely unnecessary, he was being a gatekeeper, preventing people from getting knowledge, essentially.
Yeah.
By writing like overly, confusing.
Yeah.
And we did talk about this in that first season of the podcast, if anyone's interested.
Mm-hmm. We also kept track of like how many times he references women versus men. That was a good one.
Yeah, it was very small number of women.
Okay, so we listened to the rest of the podcast, and we're going to skip it, and we're just going to see how AI sums it all up. Reading something like this is to come away with some useful knowledge where you process it all and put it together. And one thing AI does as well is analysis and simplifying things for an ending.
Sure. And the stuff we skip, you could just read the book and get exactly what they're saying because they're just pulling quotes out and not giving attribution and talking like Gardner, essentially. But a few things they continue to do, they keep referencing examples as if you have read them.
Right.
Or know them. And there's even ones that Gardner explains. He'll put a paragraph explanation of what this example is and the details of it, and they skim over that whole thing, which again implies that you would have to read the text to understand the examples that they're talking about.
Right. Like they'll say, or as with death, as in Faust, or life with Anna Karenina. Well, I don't get anything out of that.
Right. It does remind me a little bit of some like really egotistical professors who would do shit like that. And I grew to loathe those people because they're just name dropping at this point. But yeah, it's not really helpful.
Okay, so here we'll listen to the end of the episode. Okay.
That's how Gardner puts it. He says you can't really teach how to write a great denouement, just hint at it.
What's his advice then?
Read your own story over and over. Look for those subtle meanings, those quiet connections you might have put in without fully realizing it. Then, consciously bring them to the surface.
Through repetition, metaphor, putting related symbols near each other.
Exactly. Amplify the echoes. But he gives 2 warnings.
Okay.
1, don't overdo it. Don't let the machinery show so much it breaks the fictional dream. Keep it integrated.
Right. Don't be too obvious.
And 2, don't be too subtle either.
So the advice is don't do it too much and don't do it too little.
Just right. Like Goldilocks.
So simple. Let's all go right through an American novel now.
Yeah, that sounds great. Just reread your stuff over and over again, dear listener.
This is the falling out of AIs. We trained it on so much stuff where we've been stupid that it's kind of stupid too.
Yeah. Well, we trained it on blog posts, which are like really intellectually vapid. They break it down into a listicle. They're really vague and general. They don't go in deeply, right?
We haven't figured out quite how to train AIs. We've trained them to be like us, and unfortunately, we're kind of sad in certain ways.
Yeah. We're not exactly raising the bar or anything.
The reader might miss the connections entirely, It's a balancing act.
Wow.
Wow.
So yeah, plotting is, it's way more than
Wow.
just what happens next.
Oh, absolutely. As you can see from Gardner, it's this incredibly complex dance between structure, character, theme, intuition, intellect, all working together to create meaning and impact. From working backward, plotting forward,
This is the summary up.
understanding energetic versus intellectual drive, shaping novellas and novels,
Yeah.
it all leads towards that potential for a really profound closing resonance.
Yeah, understanding these structures definitely gives you a new appreciation for the craft, doesn't it? You start to see the hidden architecture in stories you love.
It really does. It's a new lens.
I think Chick AI has the hots for dude AI. What do you think? I mean, she's like, wow.
I would be fun to have a system where you basically you designate one person as the expert and one person as the fanboy and switch them out, because it'd be kind of fun to listen to this with a woman lecturing the guy saying, yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, I know, right? So here's the thing. This actually adds another problem because of how misogynistic Gardner is, that they chose a male voice to like head the podcast.
I mean, if you listen to it, there are times where she says stuff too, but in the end, it often feels like she's deferring to him to explain what's going on.
She's always deferring to him.
There are a few places where she explains stuff too. but
Does
yeah.
she? I always caught, if she was giving some explanation, it was just pretty much just support whatever he was saying. It was never like a new idea. I wonder how often they switch places. Like if I uploaded things into this AI, would it always give me the male dominant voice, or is it going to switch? I mean, I feel like sometimes I take over the podcast. I feel really bad. Like it becomes the Renee show and I'm like, Kim, cut me out. I feel really, because I get excited, like I'm doing it right now. I like to think that this podcast is ours.
It sounds like you're doing a lot of talking if you actually get into it, and you'd be surprised how much talking I do. I balance it out. But again, it is too bad that they aren't giving each their own expertise so they can go against each other a bit more. They're just going through the thing. Right now, we'll finish up.
So here's a final thought to chew on. How might these ideas, profluence, that forward drive, and the difference between intellectual design and energetic unfolding, how might they apply outside of fiction?
Because that was just a question. She's supporting him.
Interesting. Like in other kinds of communication, or even how we perceive real events.
Yeah. Is there a hidden logic or an underlying structure to the stories playing out around us every day? Something to think about.
And then it just ends?
Wait, there's no ending? That's it?
I think that was the ending.
Holy crap, they like fell off a cliff.
That's what I got from the recording.
Well, that's all, folks, apparently.
We'll leave you with this question, which we're not finishing.
Right. So yeah, final thoughts.
I don't think we're going to be replaced anytime soon.
I mean, I don't know. What does quote unquote anytime soon mean? Like a year from now, maybe. But I don't know, man. I would have fallen asleep. If I was listening to that in my car, I would have had an accident.
Yeah, definitely. Do you want any remaining thoughts on it?
I mean, except for the doom and gloom of people who don't have critical reading skills and young students, relying on this thing, which they will. And, you can't blame them. I do not blame the other generation. I don't like poo-pooing on another generation. I think that's rude. I am very glad that I grew up without the internet when I was a kid. I'm old, dear listener, and so is Kim. No offense, Kim. And we both grew up in a world without the internet.
That really should be a t-shirt. I'm glad I grew up without the internet.
But see, that's poo-pooing in the next generation. All I'm just saying is I'm glad that I had the opportunity, because technology wasn't that far along yet. It was quite far along, but it wasn't this far along, that I had the opportunity to learn critical reading skills and critical thinking skills and critical writing skills without AI getting in my way. I can't imagine myself now not using it when I shouldn't be using it. I shouldn't be using it as a crutch. I should be learning it on my own. I don't know if I would have been able to do that. So I'm really kind of glad for the opportunity of not having that to rely on.
Yep.
What about you, Kim?
Well, I mean, I think the purpose of this particular AI is to take written text and to present it in a way that people can learn from that text. And I don't think it's there yet. Maybe for summarizing something that you're already familiar with. Like, I think it'd be great for helping you get through work documents or something like that. But it is not a way to learn a new thing.
No, it is not a way to learn a new thing. It's very difficult when they're not even providing opinion or breaking anything down in a new way that the text doesn't already provide.
Yep, bringing in other references, bringing in other experience. Okay, so you know the other thing that this podcast did not do? It did not plug its process group.
Oh, snap. It forgot to plug the process group. Dang.
Tell us about the process group, Renee.
Well, since AI won't do it for us, we have a process group every week. Starts at 5 o'clock on Wednesdays, Pacific Standard Time. You can show up. It's free. You can find it on meetup.com. You can go to our website and click on the banner. We talk about writing. We don't read each other's work, but we talk about writing. You could bring up AI. You could talk about a theme you're working on. You could talk about a win. You could talk about a loss. I mean, we've learned so much from other people who come and participate, and all sorts of different writers. We've got science writers, we've got academics, we've got novelists, poets. I mean, everybody shows up, and we're cool, and it's fun. New people show up all the time. So we hope to see you there.
Yeah, come join us there. Okay. Thank you guys so much for listening. And with any luck, we will snag an interview we've been trying to get for the last couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah. Time. So stay tuned.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Words to Write By is produced by Renee Nelson and Kim Smiga-Otto. Our theme music is Roll Back the Carpet by Cool Cat Music. Have a great day.
Good old working class background for the win.